invite my panelists up to the stage whilst announcing it. We're going to be focusing on uranium and new nuclear. I've got Rod Adams from Nucleation Capital, Jon Bey, Standard Uranium, Ross McElroy, Fission, Uranium, and Andrew Ferrier from Okapi Resources. So while gentlemen come up, I'll just sort of frame this one. We've had a lot of discussion so far throughout the event about the energy transition. It was quite interesting yesterday to hear the lithium crew and some of the other materials investors into battery materials talk about how the energy transition won't come as thick and fast as we'd hope or we'd like, and there is a real raw materials shortage that's slowing that down, along with lots of other nuanced issues. And that's why we wanted to put this panel together to talk about the opportunity through uranium and new nuclear, and what some of the changes and developments are going on in the market here as the world looks for increasing amounts of resources for cleaner fuels, low carbon fuels. So gentlemen, thanks for joining me. Why don't we start on that? There was a comment yesterday around how in one of the panels around how the uranium market is moving. Why don't we share some ideas on the supply-demand dynamics out there? Because it seems that we're in a structural lack of supply in this market. Jon, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Check. Well, I think the world is really waking up to the fact that nuclear is part of clean energy future. We're starting to see the supply and demand really come to fruition, where people are seeing that demand is really growing. We're seeing China announce 150 new reactors being built over the next 15 years. France continuing to drive forward with not just regular reactors, but small modular reactors. We're seeing many countries in Europe reverse course on, and instead of turning off reactors, giving them extra lifespans. In the U.S., we're seeing a new move towards small modular reactors coming, in Canada as well, which is great to see. And then we're seeing areas like Japan, where they've got 30 reactors that can be brought back online in the near future. And then Korea is also reverse course on that. So, and India just announced another announcement today, I think, Ross. So the demand for uranium and nuclear is just massive going forward. Now, in the panel earlier this week, we had them talk about Sprott coming into the market and then having a great push in the fall. Let's not forget, Sprott's coming to the market with their New York Stock Exchange listing this summer. So that could be another big catalyst. So we're seeing great things happening in this space.
Yeah, certainly. And you think that's going to be pushing the uranium spot price higher, or it's more a case of more capital needs to come into the sector through things like this?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think Sprott coming into the market and really, making that push is really opening the eyes of a lot of investors, their own investors, plus, giving it a really good push globally. People are seeing that happen. And coming out of COP26, we're seeing nuclear being encountered now as green energy and being included in that funds going forward, which is remarkable.
Excellent. Okay. Rod, do you want to introduce yourself and Nucleation Capital as well as the sort of VC investor on the panel here?
I'm the managing partner for Nucleation Capital. We're a young venture capital firm focused mainly on advanced nuclear, microreactors and small modular reactors in particular. There's a lot of private ventures that have been working on this for the last, in some cases, 15 years. It's a long run, but they're getting close to liftoff. We see huge potential for achieving economies of scale by producing not tens, not dozens, but hundreds to thousands of the same design over and over again, putting them out through factories and delivering on site and with a setup time measured in days to get the reactor up and running. In many cases, the microreactors are replacements for diesel engines. Small modular reactors, in some cases, are not all that small. 300 megawatts is a pretty good sized power plant, and it's able to supply, say, a city of 300,000 people. So the small modular reactors are designed to be able to be put in a much shorter period of time. And again, the same thing over and over again, learning by doing and achieving economies that way. And then once again, it's clean enough to run inside a submarine, and I can testify to that.
Excellent. Ross, do you want to comment on the market at the moment, how you see things, maybe apart from what some of the others have said?
Yeah, but I will say, that's really encouraging what Rod's talking about. We do see it's our assessment too, that the small modular reactors, micro reactors, that is a real paradigm shift, I think, in the sector. We've not seen that. I think you're talking about, you'll be able to put them in places that have never even conceived to have nuclear power. And obviously, the real surge in nuclear, the new reemergence is part of the climate change. The every country now recognizing that global climate change is a necessary part. Nuclear is such a key part of that equation. There's other formed, with solar and wind, for example, but nuclear really is probably the only alternate form of base load energy, for 24/7, 365 day a year base load demand. That's where nuclear is. We see I guess over the last 10 years, the whole sector has been so depressed that a number of, good projects have shut down. But the demand continues to grow and grow and grow. The supply obviously has been restricted. And I think that the movement we've seen in the price of the commodity over the last 2 years continues to go up. It's all about climate change starting with, and obviously with, geopolitical risk now in the forefront. The price of the commodities up another 35%, which everything's working in favor of nuclear, I'd say, right now.
Certainly finding a sort of new identity, I suppose, with the education and the understanding after a long hiatus of perhaps public fear of it to some extent.
I want to jump in real quickly. It's not just geopolitical risk on uranium. Nuclear is a competitor to oil, gas, and coal. So anybody who's been watching the news recently understands how challenging it is to put all of your energy eggs in one basket, particularly if that basket is an aggressive neighbor who attacks its neighbors. Okay, so the changes in oil and gas prices really drive the fact that nuclear is a way to mitigate the risks by adding new supply, completely new supply into the market and taking some of the pricing power and the geopolitical strategic power away from the suppliers.
Andrew, could I bring you in for some comment on that?
Yeah, thanks. I think I think the guys have stated it pretty well in terms of, there's pretty rapid shift in what's happening in the uranium space. I think it's been accelerated greatly, and unfortunately by some of the geopolitical unrest that's occurred, particularly in Ukraine and Russia. And what I'm focused at in Okapi is what exactly the dynamic here is in the US, in terms of US is got the biggest nuclear fleet in the world, and is completely dependent at the moment on importing yellowcake and enriched uranium, and effectively has no domestic supply of uranium, which is a little bit unbelievable when you actually think about it. So what we're trying to do is position ourselves for when the inevitable happens and the uranium industry here in the US gets a massive leg up, and effectively, supply must be incentivized here in the US.
It frames it very well. We're all understanding the supply-demand sort of picture. Let's hone in on some of these innovations that are occurring in the industry now. What's new about, we sort of touched on small-scale modular reactors. That's really interesting as a way that this industry is going to look very different from how it did 30 years ago, in the image in people's minds. And if anyone wants to sort of lead on that.
This looks like a question for Rod to start with.
Well, as been mentioned before, people are recognizing that nuclear is clean, and people who are really concerned about climate change for legitimate reasons are recognizing, and we need all the tools we can get to do something that's really hard, which is to shift our whole economy away from depending on hydrocarbons to depending on something that's not going to throw carbon dioxide or methane into the atmosphere. So nuclear plays a big role there, and it's being recognized. Unfortunately, many of the people up until recently, many of the people who are most adamant and most vocal about being concerned about climate change also are most adamant about being opposed to nuclear energy. That's changing, and it's going to continue to change more, particularly when we have younger people who are active and starting to have people who are actively involved in communicating to the public. One of my favorites is a young lady from Brazil, a professional model whose name is online is Isodope. It's Isabel Blanqui, amazing TikToker. All right, so
She's an advocate of the.
oh yeah, she's a high school graduate who just loves to read and has gotten an amazing amount of information about clean energy and the importance of that to our economy and the importance of it to the growth of the public. And she's a great spokesperson.
What about some of the technologies, like the fuel, the way the fuels are processed, the way the waste is handled now? These are things where improvements have been made, but maybe people aren't cognizant of that because they're still thinking of like 80s, 90s kind of capability.
Well, one of the biggest changes in the advanced reactors are some of the fuel forms are completely different. We have today, most every reactor operating is a light water reactor with uranium dioxide fuel pellets stacked into a zircaloy tube and then assembled into an assembly. The advanced reactors have a variety of different shapes and sizes. We have molten salt reactors where the fuel is dissolved into a salt and the core itself is liquid and it moves around and transfers heat that way. We have liquid sodium fast reactors with metallic alloy fuels. This is an older technology, but it's been refined and improved and built on many years of learning. We have high temperature gas reactors where the fuel is in an interesting form. It's a tiny particle, a 0.5 millimeter in diameter, about the size of a grain of sand, covered with 4 layers of tightly adherent graphite and silicon carbide. Those little particles of fuel keep all of the fission products, all the radioactive material sealed up inside up to a temperature of as high as 1800 degrees Celsius before it even starts leaking out. So these high temperature gas reactors are going to be able to do high temperature industrial process heat. They're going to be able to drive Brayton cycle gas turbines at much higher efficiencies than are available for current plants. So all these different fuel forms. And the other thing that's really important is that most of the advanced reactors, particularly the smaller ones, need their uranium to be enriched to a higher level than typical for today. Today's reactors are enriched with a U-235 concentration of about 5%. The new fuel is going to high.
Okay, excellent. Gentlemen, from the company's side, what's so strategic about your projects? You're not relying on imported uranium. You're avoiding that risk around Kazatomprom, the world's biggest producer. Can we talk about strategically having assets in North America? Sure.
Sure. I think the right now, at least in the current environment, I think the obvious emphasis on North America, I think is, I think it's very important because we don't know how sanctions are going to unfold at the end of the day and where things are going to be. But having, assets for ours in Fission, we're in Canada, we're in the Athabasca Basin. Canada's a favorable trading partner. Our biggest trading partners to the south in the U.S. They're obviously wanting nuclear. I think what really sets the deposits in the Athabasca part, they're just economically superior, and I think they're the only area outside of Kazakhstan which dominates the market right now, at least in we're producing uranium, natural uranium. It's a fact that they're very low operating costs, and I think this is something that we have almost equally is advantageous in the Athabasca Basin. Very low operating costs, and at the end of the day, those are going to be projects that probably move it to the top of the queue on the production side. And so, I think there's going to continue to be emphasis on exploration, emphasis on development, emphasis on mining in Canada's Athabasca Basin. It's an old story. It's been producing uranium for the last 70 years, and it's easy to see that it's going to continue to be an important player for at least the next 70 years.
Yeah, and I'll pick up from there because our project is right beside Ross. So the Triple R is, Ross's project, and our NextGen has Arrow, and then there's Standard Uranium's Davidson River project. And for us, we're earlier stage. So we see what's happening right beside us. They've got advanced projects. They're going into production. And at that time, Canada and the US, they need to be buying and sourcing uranium from safe areas. So we see the timeline working out beautifully for our two companies. And we see the future for Canada producing uranium to be remarkable for, as Ross says, the next 30, 40, 50, 70 years. So for us, it's about exploring in this region, making discoveries, advancing those along, having a mine and mill built in our backyard. And Saskatchewan, like several other provinces in Canada, are moving towards small modular reactors as well. We're going to be producing uranium and actually having power generated in Saskatchewan that can power through uranium, which is remarkable. So the future is bright for companies in Canada, specifically in the Athabasca Basin.
Would you like to say on that?
Yeah, look, obviously, the Athabasca Basin is where a lot of uranium exploration has occurred and will continue to occur. And it's clearly, what Fission and NextGen have are clearly tier one assets, right? Undisputedly. I think, for a company like us who also has properties in Athabasca Basin, early stage exploration, we've sort of coupled that along with some US assets, which I guess are a bit different in nature in terms of, for us being a junior mining company, they're certainly sort of lower capex, small scale projects, potentially ISR amenable, which means for sort of $40, $50 million, you can have a 1.5 million pound produce, 1.5 million pounds per year producer, which is sort of smaller on scale and obviously not a tier one project, but certainly can be relatively low capex and actually can be something that we can bring through the whole development curve. So there's sort of different ways to think about this, but we've sort of got assets across the whole sort of spectrum of what's achievable in the uranium space.
I want to focus on, through the lens of an investor now, looking at junior uranium companies. What are some of the important things to be cognizant of if you're investing in them, rather than other mining companies that we have here? The sector is different, the way it moves, where it works. We've been told or pitched that when the uranium bull market picks up, it really picks up, but we haven't seen the spot price move for quite a long time, and now it suddenly is. So if we're not just buying into the bull market thematic, what are the other elements to look out for in the juniors?
Yeah, well, I'll hop into this one first. I mean, we've now been operating as an explorer in the Athabasca Basin now for 4 years. We've got there before a lot of the new entrants that are coming in right now. And what we've learned over this period is, look, you've got to have a number of things working in your favor. Number one, you have to have a project that's really exciting to get investors excited about. You have to have a management team that's done it, that made discoveries, that know what they're looking for. You have to have First Nations strong relationships. You have to get there. You have to build them before you start putting feet on the ground and start exploring. Then you have to work with the government to get your permits. You have to have all those things going for you. And Saskatchewan's a great place because it's got great infrastructure, great workforce. First Nations groups are willing to work with you. Ross and I work together, work in the same camp actually in Clearwater River Denny Nation, and we share the camp in the summer. We do our drill programs together. So we've got an excellent relationship with our First Nation partners. We're drilling, we're raising capital. Companies who are investors who want to look for companies with a big bang for the buck, a big torque, you look for exploration companies because that's where the big home run is. If they make a discovery and move that along, there's a great opportunity for investors to have a real big win.
Okay. Anything else to add?
Yeah, some of the key factors I think you want to look at, or anybody looking at, you want to see jurisdiction. You want, it's so important, as Jon just said, management, the ability to the guys that have done it before, low operating costs. I mean, these are all factors that play a big part. I've already talked about the low operating costs, but the jurisdiction is probably, it might have been second on the list of priorities when you're sort of setting it up. I think that what's happening now with jurisdiction is kind of moving up to the top of the list of some of the criteria you want to look at. And obviously our district that we're talking about is important, but anything North American, Canada, North American, I think becomes equally key. So.
What about this? We talk about capex a lot, but what about the energy costs at the moment, the oil price, inflation that we're having, workforce, labor issues that are hitting mining in general, maybe not so much uranium. Like, how's that impacting the businesses? Andrew, in your private equity days, you would have scrutinized companies on a number of these things. How do you, what does Okapi do that's different that makes you confident that these things are overcomable right now?
One thing that's always attracted me to the uranium industry is just the price elasticity of uranium. So the uranium price can double, but the uranium component is a very small component of the overall cost of running a nuclear reactor. So that does not mean the electricity price is going to double. It's actually, you guys can correct me wrong, but I think the uranium price is actually going to account for about 5 to 10% of the overall cost of running a nuclear reactor.
Yeah, probably less than 5%.
Yeah, so it's a very small component. So that means for investors in uranium equities, uranium can go to 100 plus, and the electricity price is still going to be hardly going to move. That is not the case with oil, gas, and coal. So that means, and so the substitution effect just isn't there. You see copper go to $2.50. Before copper go to $4.50, $5, substitution kicks in, along with a lot of other base metals. And coal, if coal price doubles, that goes nearly straight to your electricity costs. So that's always something I found pretty important, because I've seen it work on other commodities to a really large degree, where you think everything's moving in your favor, and all of a sudden, there's sort of, pushback effectively.
I'm going to jump in real quick if you don't mind. Obviously, one of the operating costs that you guys have is running diesel engines to run your mining equipment, your mills. I'm hoping that sometime in the near future, you're going to start eating your own dog food and using uranium to supply your uranium mines.
That is the plan in Saskatchewan right now. The Premier Scott Moe has come out and said they want to have small modular reactors operating in Saskatchewan by the end of this decade. So we're hoping we'll see, the new mines being built in Saskatchewan and having small modular reactors being a part of the solution. That would be remarkable.
Yeah, certainly my wish as well. Our project timeline at PLS is towards the end of the decade. So, we haven't factored that in yet into the feasibility study into electricity, but it's certainly an option. I hope that we are able to explore. I would love to be able to power the mine, the whole mine development off of a small modular reactor of some sort, some size. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we have some micro reactors that are probably going to be proving themselves by 2028. So maybe by 2030 they'll be ready to be commercial.
Does anyone have a question at all? Yep, just down there, please.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah. How do you foresee Sprott's impact on uranium market moving forward with the, with the taking over of the URNM ETF as well as the NYSE listing? Will they be able to, buy to the capacity that they've been doing over the last 6 to 8 months? And do you think that'll be kind of how would that affect the uranium market moving forward?
I'll start off with that. It's a very good question. And I think all of us in the uranium space and in the nuclear space are watching that as well. I think when Sprott came into the market in September, October, and really took the uranium market by surprise, and then we're aggressively buying uranium off the spot market, it had a really strong impact. The price of uranium shot up from 34 all the way up to $51, and then they stopped buying, and it sort of came all the way back down again. So, and now with stuff happening in Europe, it's back up again to here we are. I think we're at $48 right now as of today. And there's rumors. Well, Sprott has put the application into the New York Stock Exchange to get their listing. Rumors are it's going to be sometime in Q2, Q3, and there's anticipation that's going to have another catalyst to get the spot price moving up further. So we're looking forward to it. We don't really know. I hope it's not one of those non-factors, but I think it could have a nice impact on the price of spot going up again, and long-term contracts as well on the back of that.
I think the key word in there is catalyst. I think that's what sort of happened with the Sprott fund. It was a catalyst to kind of get the thing going, but now it starts taking on a life of its own. It isn't solely dependent on the Sprott fund anymore, but that was certainly the kickstart to kind of get the whole market excited. But I do think, as everybody's trying to grapple with climate change and the bigger things, where's the energy going to come from? Where's the power going to clean energy going to come from? realizing that there is not a lot of production out there, but the demand is certainly strong. I think this is obviously the things that will carry us forward over the next several years, decades.
Real quick on Sprott, I'm pretty sure the way they have it structured is that their purchases will slow down as the price goes up because they don't have a whole bunch of money waiting to go in. It's people deciding that they think it's going to go up a little bit more and they put a little bit more in.
Ask about utilities companies buying cycles. It's quite an interesting part as well. Is there any sort of change there? The audience might like?
Well, I think that's a question we could talk on for quite a long time, but I think it's really important to realize that a lot of these utilities have been sourcing a lot of their uranium and nuclear fuel from areas in Europe, from Kazakhstan and from Russia. And now they have to really start to think about secure supply for the next number of years and decades. And how risky is Russia going to be, and impacting that? Extremely risky. So I think a lot of the utilities are really starting to rethink, what are the options, and can the U.S. move down that whole nuclear supply cycle and do it internally in the U.S.? It's going to take a number of years, but I think it'd be a smart move for the U.S. to go in that direction.
I might add, when I started in the uranium sector in the mid 80s, it was interesting. A lot of the utilities actually had ownership on projects. They were always joint venture partners on a number of projects, and that was one way they secured it. So there's offtake agreements. There's different ways to do it. So far, we maybe we'll see them starting to start knocking on the doors of companies to actually get some ownership through the whole exploration, development, and production, and lock in some supply that way.
Are you saying utilities are going to fund my exploration program?
Indeed, they used to, and it may happen again.
Yeah, one thing that I'm not sure of is I've talked to a lot of utility buyers over the years. I think that a fair number of them assumed that uranium prices were going to be low and steady for a long time, and they were selling off a lot of their inventory or using it up and not buying it again. I'm not positive that's true. I know that it's true for some of them.